preference when it comes to the type of pressure on force fetch?
Oh, this is a
Ear
great question.
pinch, toe hitch, e-collar, none of the above. Let's start with, I want to start with Grayson on this one.
Okay, let's start by saying let's not call it type of pressure. Let's just call it,
Pressure.
let's call it to me, it's just a different contact point to apply pain. So I don't like the word pressure in this scenario because I think I think this is one of those places when we talk pressure that uh, we're convoluting the language on purpose, and so um, we are administering pain to get a result. So it's negative
Yeah.
reinforcement, right? And we can call it discomfort. What that would be fair, but I think this is where I don't like the word pressure because I think it's like this is where I feel the context is that we're trying to avoid some sort of conversation that is like what is
Well,
negative reinforcement?
I actually want to stop and explore that for a second because I
Sure.
think it's important in this context. When we use the word pressure, can you give me an example of a positive pressure? Like that we could use that the dog would interpret as positive? Because I understand what you're saying, but like when we get into the whole semantics and language of it to where like,
It's like let's think of stress, right? Like so stress, like I think there can be eustress and distress, right? So like um there are like trying to achieve an objective can be eustress, like and achieving that objective like in the process somewhere along the line that can be a sort of stress that has um a desired outcome, and then we can avoid, and then you could argue that avoiding and escaping, or escaping and avoiding pressure could lead to a positive outcome, and of course, or a desired outcome. And then, of course, if we add a positive reinforcer to the back end of that, then we can drastically increase the value of the positive reinforcer on the other side. All that said, like in force fetch, when we just to answer the question as deliberately as possible, like I don't think it matters in the least, other than the mechanics of the motions you're trying to perform, where pain comes from, as long as the dog has a clear signal that they can escape and eventually avoid the pressure.
Even if you're
I
using such low levels that would not be painful,
Yeah, I mean it's like, but
you
it's
would
all
still
about,
qualify it as pain.
yeah, because it's all about perception, and like if it's not worth avoiding, then who cares? Like so, I like the word pain because it just gets even though it's probably exaggerated, it gets all, pardon my language, all the bullshit off the table. Like, I'm not trying to avoid the conversation with you. Like, is it pain? At some point, it's going to be pain. If you're willingly doing it, it's not a force fetch, right?
I agree with that.
yeah,
So
fair enough.
like,
Yeah.
so you have to be avoiding something.
Yeah.
You have to be escaping something.
Right.
In order to have negative reinforcement, it's got to be worth escaping.
But there's discomfort that people will escape.
The your truck dinging until you put your seatbelt on is negative
Yeah,
reinforcement.
of course. I mean, sure, it is, and like being cold and putting on a jacket is negative reinforcement.
Yeah.
Discomfort,
there-
annoyance.
Being hot and taking off a layer is negative reinforcement. That said, there are levels to this, and it is a force fetch.
Yes.
Right.
Right. And I think, and so I personally, in my opinion, if I'm force fetching a dog, whether I'm doing it in a way that would be consistent with modern training methods such as NAPOPO, or I'm going straight to the table and throwing a toe hitch on, which I do most often. By the end of the process, it will have been pain. Because I always want my dog to be a willing participant. That said, uh, I'm going to narrow the options to the point that you're going to perform a behavior you would rather not perform.
Mm.
And I want the retrieve to be that thing at some point. I want to see some resistance, and I want to see you overcome it.
So just to clarify, toe hitch is your primary
Yeah,
form of
yeah, no, toe hitch. Yeah, always start with toe hitch. I just like it. I think it's very convenient for like the way, like I can use my left hand to pull on your toe and my right hand to deliver a bumper,
There you go.
and that makes it easy for
Nate,
me.
what's your preference?
When I first learned force fetch, we used ear pinch. So the force fetch that I used initially was Keeler method, and that is an ear pinch against a chain collar is the way. So your thumb's on one side, the ear is between your thumb and a chain collar. As far as which form of pressure I think is best or I like the most. I agree with Grayson that I don't think it matters. I think the important thing is that your dog understands what it means. And so if I'm pinching the ear or I'm pulling on a toe hitch or I'm using the slip lead, just does the dog understand what they need to do to make that pressure turn off is the most important piece. I think each one gives you different benefits. So ear pinch, and the first dozen dogs that I force fetched, I didn't force fetch because they were sporting dogs. I force fetched them because they were biting dogs, like biting people and weren't supposed to. And so for me, one of the best ways to help address that was that's my mouth and I decide what goes in it and comes out of it and when those things happen, and you don't get to use it any way other than that, right? And so like when I can isolate a behavior with the dog's mouth, I felt like that was almost like that was my finishing when I was working with pet dogs that I was dealing with aggression issues.
I really like that.
So I found a lot of value in that. And what I like about ear pinch there is if I pinch your ear and you turn your head to put your teeth on me, I grab the other one. And now you can't turn your head anywhere because I'm holding both sides, right? I got left and right turn signals now, right? And so that was what I think the value of the ear pinch. I can also push the dog towards the object if I have an ear pinch, which I like. It's more mobile if I still have to use it when the dog is off the table and on the ground. Toe hitch, what I think is cool about toe hitch, and I could count on, you could cut off most of my fingers and I could still count how many times I've used a toe hitch. But one of the things that I think, like a lot of training is moving from elicited behavior to having it be discriminate. So the first time I put pressure on you, you may cycle through a wide variety of behaviors trying to turn that pressure off, but it's the one thing that I want that is when pressure should actually turn off. And once the dog experiences that one or more times, then that goes from being an elicited response to a discriminant one where they go, I know what the right answer is, so next time I'm prompted with this pressure, I will just do that thing. And what is cool about toe hitch is that I think it's the one where you see it most obviously. So here's what I mean. Most dogs, if I apply discomfort to them, they are going to try to put their mouth on the source of that discomfort. So if I pull on your toe and you turn your head to bite at your foot, and that's where that pipe happens to be, then that is elicited. It's just in the way, right? So maybe you grab that. And then when I can pull on your foot over here and you bite the thing over here, there is no question that you understand exactly what you're supposed to do to turn pressure off. And it kind of removes some amount of my influence that I see when I teach people to use ear pinch, is they do too much of the work for the dog. The slip lead, like in the Napopo unforced force fetch, when you see a lot of guys do that, their presentation is always from the front. And then when you look at this, the types of dogs, right, the protection sport dogs, that was really where that system came from. The whole idea there is if I'm a decoy and you're being chewy on your bite, I can use my force fetch to mean you got to grab a hold of that thing and settle down. And so the decoy may be the one that's manipulating that. And so then it's the same picture there, right? So there's like a use case for each one of those things that I think is informed based on what your purpose is. And this is why training is so cool to me, because we're talking about one behavior and then we have a bunch of options there, because if I think forward enough to what my use case is, I might pick different ones. The fact of the matter for me is when I teach this stuff to people, I tell them they can use whatever application of pressure that they want, and then we're going to end up transitioning to e-collar at some point anyway. For most people now, I am teaching some form of collar pressure because I find that for most people it's a lot more palatable than the other pieces. And the last piece that I would say is I agree with Grayson at some point it is compulsion, it is pain compliance, but the way that we do this stuff, if we prepare the dog correctly, right, is like at first, especially if I'm doing it in this unforced force fetch way where I shape it first, the presentation of this object, you put your mouth on it, I mark and reward you. And then that pipe showing up, I already know you have a discriminant response. You know what you're supposed to do when you're given that cue. And so then when I pressure, release, and then present that cue, now you know that this application of pressure predicts this behavior and this discriminant response you already know. And so then when I start applying pressure and then providing the pipe, and then you grab the pipe and then pressure turns off, now I'm dabbling in the dark arts of negative reinforcement. And then we do that long enough where the pressure is predictive of, basically it's a signal to do work. It's a cue, basically. It's a cue to do the work, and then you're going to get paid. And then over time, we manage hope and struggle. But what I am doing is I'm turning the heat up on that pressure, whether that's with whatever collar I'm using, or the ear pinch, or the toe hitch, or the e-collar, to the point where I am doing pain compliance. But because I've prepared my tools well enough, when I mark and pay you, the payoff was still valuable enough for you that you are like, that was a little spicy, but I'm good, right? And so that's part of, I think, like the secret sauce to the way that I'm trying to train every dog that I put my hands on is I want to be able to put my foot in your ass, but have you not get pouty about it at all. And a lot of that comes from the preparation work on the front end.
Is it?
Yep.
And I'm sorry, Randall. Like I
No,
don't,
you're
but
good.
I've got like a.
You got to get it out.
I got to get it out while we're in it, because I agree. Like I agree that putting a lot of time and effort into developing a discriminant response as clearly as possible and having clear signals is important and valuable. There is something in me that likes to deny the elicited portion at some point and say, you have to make a decision. Here's an unclear signal. And a lot, and I don't know why, but there's value. And so one thing I've always said is that I think force fetch is a master class in escape avoidance. And I think there's a value to force fetch that goes beyond retrieving.
Yes.
And I've always said this, like
Yes.
in like a resilience kind of thing. I have seen quote unquote soft dogs go on a table and 3 weeks later come off a table a completely different animal.
Yes.
And I like to see dogs sort through very hard problems, not from a place of motivation, but from a place of escape avoidance, and discover that they're stronger than they thought they were and gain confidence.
I agree with everything you said. I just don't know why the motivation and the escape avoidance are mutually exclusive.
I don't think they are. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, because I think you can accomplish the same thing. And maybe there's a bit of a sadist to this. I don't think there is. I think there's value. I don't know why.
Well, I think we get back into the territory of like, what are we capable of versus the average gun dog it yourself guy.
Well, and that's 100% true. But
I wouldn't advise the average person.
A lot of the structure in the system that we're using is to make like the use of pressure as safe as it can be. And again, this is a place where like I really admire you as a trainer, and I think that what happens a lot of times is like everything that you're saying I don't really disagree with. I just don't think like most people that you turn a dog back over to, or that you're going to instruct, unless they're there with you and can do the work step by step with you, and you're there when you hit those weird sticking points, and
Yes.
you're like, okay, so now we're in a spot where the dog's not really sure what to do, but we've started applying pressure, and so now basically we have to live here until the decision is made. Like, somebody needs to be coached through that, because if they're not,
Well, then
what will happen
frustration sets
100% of
in
the
and
time is
Yeah, so
pressure
let me
turns off at the wrong
throw my
time.
disclaimer in there, please. Uh, not only do as I say, do as I do. Not only do as I do as I say, but or do as I mean sometimes.
Yeah.
But in this particular, I am talking specifically about myself in certain scenarios with specific dogs. Like I like cleanliness and I like crispness and I like a certain picture. Um, and I'm not just being a sadist when I do this. I don't I can't completely describe it, and I need to put some thought into why I think there's value in in trying to get a dog to sort through this as beat the pressure.
You're making a
I
resilient
agree
dog is
with
what you're
everything you're
doing.
saying. I
Yeah.
think so like for me, like with our puppies, right? We set up these little obstacle courses for them, and they have to work through a bunch of environmental discomfort, and we really don't give them any help when they do that, and they don't I guess they know that there's a reward for them at the end of it, but what they learn very quickly is, like, if they quit or give up, they don't eat right
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
And then that might only be like 2 hours before we give them another shot in those situations. But my point is I agree very much that building that resiliency in the dogs and having them understand that,
It's not just
like,
building it. It is like there is a bit of a crucible aspect to this that's not we're not and again, this is not every dog. And I can't tell you why. And there's just certain dogs that get on the table, and I'm like, all right, man, today is your day. You're gonna learn something about yourself. Um, and whether and it's completely intuitive.
Mhm.
I want, first things first, like, I'm never doing this cold. Like, you're getting on and off the table willingly, you're happy, we're getting up there, we're moving, gloves in the mouth. I do a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then a specific dog is going to show me right away that, especially if they have a propensity towards learned helplessness, if they try it, like, and they really not just clam up, but I believe that they're milking the system to some degree,
Sure.
that it's just, like, hey man, here, there's one way out, and you don't know it yet, but you're going to find it
Hmm.
in this
So
moment.
let me ask, how does this change based on the different type of pressure or pain?
Well,
whether it's an ear pinch, toe hitch,
well, I mean,
the
it's going
slip
to,
lead or e-collar. Like, how does that change this perspective? Like, I agree. Everybody agrees.
Well, I mean, but
where
I'm
does it fall in line here?
yeah, and I want to add. Sorry, I
no,
can't
no,
help but
please.
ask. How do you weigh the fallout of handler conflict with all of that?
I'm deliberately creating handler conflict, and and so I guess that's the thing, and like I can't, I would never.
I can see it with a learned helplessness dog. I get it. Like, hey, buddy, you got to figure this out.
Well, no,
right?
it's it's not a dog that's demonstrated necessarily learned helplessness. It's a dog that's showing me like, hey,
They have the propensity
I'm
for it.
looking for ways out of this that aren't necessarily the way out. I'm looking for any. It's not every time because certain dogs are going to look for other ways out, and they're going to hit a state of panic that's not going to be productive. There are dogs that are going to overcome that in that moment, and we end up with like a very poignant singular learning event.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then, bam, like the same way we get a cheat code when we've put a lot of time and effort into shaping. There's a cheat code where it's like, I overcame the hardest thing I've ever done in my life right there in that moment. And now I have the confidence to move forward
And if they don't
quickly.
overcome,
And I tackle that early with that specific dog. Now, that being said, I do want to get to your point, which is, what do I think the difference in the contact points is? For me personally, Nate touched on a lot of it with the toe hitch in terms of it goes, that's an immediate way to get to discrimination. I think because you can't reach your toe sometimes, like depending on how I'm manipulating you. There's only one thing you can reach. It's
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
I can make that your way out.
yeah.
Um, if ear pinch, I think, and for me personally, I have a propensity to apply some forward pressure, some like mechanical force forward, and I don't like it because I want the dog. Not and there's times where I could see value in it, but like for me personally, I would rather the dog actually fight against the mechanical force to get to that. The place I see value in my ear pinch is usually after my ground transition, usually after my collar pressure, where I just want a personal touch at the water's edge or something. And like I feel like my collar pressure there could be confused for like water entry stuff if I've done force to water or something like that. So it's easier for me to grab a collar and say, no, I want this in your mouth. I'm not trying to force you to water. I'm not trying to make you heel. I'm not trying to make you do anything else. Don't worry. In the moment, I can grab your collar, pinch your ear, and you know exactly why that's happening if I've introduced it to some degree. But that being said, don't do as I do. Like do as I say
Yeah.
on this one. Like you're playing in pretty murky waters there, and you're creating conflict on purpose. And I don't think that's a good thing for your average GDI wire to do. But I do think at some point that there's some value in having an unclear picture and having the dog find clarity.
See, and so like my background in Keeler, like so the way that that would work, I think the reason why I don't think about it that way is because we're kind of building up to that all along.
Yeah.
Like there's applications of pressure there, and the dog never knows what they mean at first, and so
Yes.
you're kind of you're doing progressively more difficult things. So we start with long line work. I'm moving away from you, and all you have to do if my long line is 20 feet long is you need to move 1 inch. If you're 19
19 and
feet
11
11
inches.
inches,
Yeah.
right, then you
Yeah.
then you are comfortable again. And then we go to healing, which is you get plus or minus 2 feet from what I consider ideal, what Bart would call potato healing position,
Yes.
right? It's like it's a flat heel, but you have to stay in that spot. And so we took and the way that it works basically is like if you have a 15-foot long line, you're giving the dog 5 feet away from you before you're turning and moving the other direction. So they
Yes.
basically get a third of the line. When you switch to a 6-foot leash, they still get a third of the line. So now they get 2 feet of room to move around before they receive negative reinforcement to put them back in the right position. After that, we start working on sit. So I'm pulling up on your collar and pushing down on your butt to get you to sit. You don't necessarily know what that means at first. Most dogs lock up when you do that first, right? And then the only way that you get out of that is to sit. And then we work on stands. If I was going to work a pointing dog through this work, I would either omit the sit until much later, or I would equally basically put the dog in a sit or a stand as we come to a stop from healing, so that one isn't more,
Sure.
it doesn't have a bigger reinforcement history than the other. After that, we go to downs. The way you do downs in Keeler is you have the collar behind the dog's head cinched up tight, your forearms running down their back, and then you basically pull their front feet out from under them and you lay on top of them.
Sure.
So you want to talk about like the kind of like very personal kind of there's a bit of subordination there, right? Like the I think the discussion that you're having at force fetch with most dogs I've had in the down already,
Sure.
some of that, and then we kind of continue through the rest of that novice level work, and then by the time we get to the retrieve in Keeler, we start with I open the dog's mouth and I place a pipe or a buck into their mouth, right? And so we do that for a while, and then but what they're still looking to see before you ear pinch is we cinch that collar up tight and hold it, that choke chain, and then I touch that pipe to that dog's lips. And if I
Really
got to
good.
stay there for the next 3 hours,
Yeah.
right? But you don't get out until you put that pipe in your mouth. But we don't start ear pinch until you show me that this cue is it gives me a discriminant response,
Yeah.
and then we apply pressure because anybody like Keeler is one of the most, I think, like vilified ways of
It
training in
is.
modern day. And the thing that I always try to articulate to people is it's still one of the most fair. Even if you don't like the way that pressure is applied, that's fine. But like even there, for me, the dog showing you I know what I'm supposed to do before I'm putting heat to them that's going to force them to do it, to me is more fair.
Yeah, and I guess, and I guess it's unfair for me to say exactly. And I have created a history because before I ever do that, before I ever ask a dog to discriminate between all the other things it shouldn't do and the one thing it should do, like we have gone through a traditional hold conditioning type of deal.
Yep.
And
And if that puppy came to you younger, you nurtured a natural retrieve, I would assume also.
I would, but more I'm dealing in just mouth mechanics at some point, and it's like, there are dogs that I need to go to the touch the lip, and I'm doing it with a toe hitch. What I'm really looking for really quickly is to discriminate that object's over here. And I want to make that jump as quickly as possible and get that shit out of the way. Like, and it's not, now I could teach it and make it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Right? Like, but there's something to be said for that dog that goes, okay. Like,
Fine.
like,
All right.
Yeah.
You know.
I think it just for me, there's just certain dogs that, and this is again one of these things where like it's a read that you make as a trainer.
Yeah.
There are certain dogs that I need that dog to know I'm making you do this, and
Yes.
like I can make you do things and you don't have a say in this. And then there's other dogs where the only time I think I'm really doing what you're talking about, where I want to see the dog work their way through hardship without really having
Yeah.
and like having the answer in advance. Most of those things for the dogs that we're talking about in the context of this podcast, most of that's environmental. It's navigating cover, stuff in the water, right? Birds spurring you or whatever, like that kind of stuff. It's
I will say, I think I made a post on this, and I'm pretty sure you actually commented on it, and I don't remember now, but I ended up in this situation.
It was probably really insightful.
It was extremely, the first dog I ever shaped a retrieve with, and then added my pressure in my closest approximation to what an apopo unforced force fetch would be based on what I've gathered from the information I've taken off the internet, was my puppy Ripple, and it was beautiful, and it was so clean and so clear all the way through the process. And one day on Forced to Pile, it wasn't that bad, but I was unhappy. I recognized, like, you know what? There's still, it's never been doing the thing you don't want to do.
How much what we would call conflict management, what I think most people would just call proofing, is done in the like throughout your force fetch process and Forced to Pile? Like how often is there there's some draw that he would want to do something else instead, where you get to say that's not allowed and I'm making you do this thing that you want?
It ends up happening. I mean, a lot of that happens through, honestly, there are moments, there's these little bumps in the road. I would say it's less about competing motivator and more about, I don't want to do this and I'm looking to escape it in the moment.
But isn't that part of what Forced to Pile you're supposed to get from that too?
And to me, yeah. Like, so you get a dog that like tries to squirt out a different direction. A lot of times I end up with like heel issues. I mean, there's normal parts of it for me, so I don't concern myself with them. I could probably work around them.
Yeah.
With dogs that, you end up hot spotting heel, you create some no-going and you force through it. And now the dog doesn't want to come in clean to heel. And then you go, okay, well, here's the deal. You don't have to do that. But you're going to go, and now you're going to have to do that and go. And eventually it's all clean.
To me, two things. The first thing is what I guess I'm not.
Well, hold on. Let me I'm going to interrupt this because we'll just spend 2 freaking episodes on this one topic.
I was
and
getting into that.
Well, I was going to Randall because we haven't even heard his answer.
I know. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, because I was gonna like, to your point, you had a problem at Forced to Pile, right? Like, and I stand with Nate of like, that's to be expected. That's going to happen. For me, force fetch means just bite this. That's the command, and I know I'm going to have conflict when I hit the ground because the dog has other options now. I don't control your environment like I did on the table or in the box. Now you have options, and this invites the opportunity for that. So, I mean, for me, it's to be expected when we go to pile. So, I you can use some tools or manage your environment to try and limit some of that, but for me, that's just expected. I know I'm going to have to say, hey, no, you really have
Well,
to
I
do
think
this.
the other thing for me, man, is I'm always going to start all that stuff on a line. So even when I start forced to pile, I'm going to apply pressure to that dog. At that point, I'm usually using an e-collar. And if they want to go whatever other direction they want to go, they can only go so far before they get stopped. And then the only way pressure turns off is when they go to that object. And so I try to
Yeah.
do that stuff with a line on the dog first so that when I
Like
take the line,
a long line?
yeah.
Okay.
And so like when I take the line off the dog,
Flexi leads are
they've
dope for
already
this.
decided. Flexi lead's fine too,
They're
but
dope
like
for this.
but like yeah, but so the idea is that I have already worked through the idea that you are going to try to explore other options, because now you already know your advantage in that situation is to go grab that object as quickly as you can, and I prevented you from being able to do anything else.
Do you guys do
So
a,
this is
a
where I
walk? Do
bring
y'all do a
in.
walking fetch prior to pile?
I
I
don't
don't know.
do walking fetch.
Okay.
I do a little bit of just groundwork on a long line, and then I'll usually just do a pile and I back away from it.
So when
I
you do
don't.
your piles, though, are you just placing the pile and having the dog pick the pile?
What I don't understand
You're
the
just
question.
putting bumpers out, and there's no prey item involved. It's just
Drop
dead prey.
bumpers,
Yeah.
and then I always mark the pile. So I guess there is
Okay.
prey because
There's
I'm
one
throwing
prey.
one bumper there.
Okay.
But eventually, I want to get to the point where it's kind of arbitrary. But for me, I want to be able to be 100 yards away
Yeah.
and have the dog not have
Yeah.
anything thrown for them, and I can just push
For
them.
sure.
So
So
the
I
pile's
start
where I
with.
want to end.
I'll start with more prey
Yeah.
on the front side, right?
Yeah.
To help incentivize that, so I can really isolate those pressures down,
Yeah.
and then I'll just fade that out as we go, right?
Like some of the stuff you're saying with like the no-goes and some of those other things, like those are problems I experienced when I was using only pressure. And so I just feel like the way that you choose to train, it's not that I think anyone is right or wrong. It's just knowing where the the cost is, because everything has a cost.
100%. So I'll be honest. Like I got through walk and fetch. I got to the pile with Ripple, um, without no goes, without popping, and I still, uh, I was unhappy with what I perceived as the level of discipline. Like I felt like I was essentially eliciting a prey response with pressure and did not have the force to the pile that I was hoping to achieve. And so I couldn't, I'd have to go back and like find out exactly why I felt like that. But I felt like
Do you have it on
I
video?
got ignition.
Do you have it on video?
It'd be tough. I've got little clips of video that would.
I'd just like to see it for
Yeah.
my own.
But I could get him at my side, and I go bing, zip, and he'd zip out there, like come back, like and it just at the end of the day, I went back and I could get to walking fast. I mean, like it was beautiful in the fact that very clear signals.
Yeah.
But I just elevated the level of pressure, went back to continuous pressure and abbreviated back down. Like that's something that I think is very important.
Yes.
And in that process, and uh, and just made it a more disciplinary behavior.
But I think that part that you just said is that would still be part of my process. Is
Sure.
I'm going to make it spicy enough that I see the behavioral change in the dog that lets me know this isn't just a cue for the behavior.
Yes.
This is something I want
and
to
and
go
that's
away.
and that's more than likely my lack of understanding of the unforced force fetch. I
I think that's a lot of people that do it and advertise it
Yeah.
is also their misunderstanding.
Like,
But where do you insert that? Do you insert it on the table, or do you wait till you get to the ground?
I like to do it on the table, and you were talking about like holding the collar and with the ear pinch. So I talked about this somewhere. A guy in our NAVDA chapter, the former training director, he would call it kicking splinters, and so that's where I'm typically using an e-collar and then a flat collar that I have a
yeah, I do
leash
the same
on,
thing. Back
and
pressure.
I'm pushing you
Yeah.
with the e-collar, and you need to dig in and fight
Yeah.
through the back pressure to get there, and that's when I'm using a high enough
I
level that I
actually-
know it's uncomfortable.
I use an eye bolt as a bit of a kind of a pulley for
Yeah.
back pressure, and so like I'll
Oh, I like
release you
that.
this way back to that. That's a Rex car deal.
I like
Yeah.
that.
So Randall,
E-collar, I'll just beat you to it.
Yep.
Like, yeah, I like an e-collar. I like to be impersonal when I'm doing force fetch. Like this, I personally don't like to make it about me. Like I don't like injecting myself in there. I don't like adding the physical cue that the dog sees me applying the pressure. Like the way I do things, I don't like it.
Oh, the other thing I'll say, just because of your response there, is every single thing that I do, I'm going to have multiple ways that I apply pressure. I'll have some form of negative reinforcement. I usually have one that's analog and one that's digital. And then I'm also usually going to mark and punish behavior also. So like your failure to give me a prompt response to something, I have a punishment marker, and then there will be a punishment event for those things. And I think that that is another thing that, like, people talk a lot about trial prep and dogs getting smart to tools and things. My whole thing is it doesn't matter what you're wearing or what came off. I have a way, if I need to come for that ass, like
Yeah.
I have a way to do that.
That comes for me later, right?
Yeah.
Like that comes later.
yeah.
I mean, you can ask him if I say "fooey," like Creek looks at
Game
me
over.
like, "Holy, I'm about to die."
Yeah.
You
Right,
know,
right.
like that. You know,
And-
the
and
negative
this-
markers. That's probably, we're getting a little off subject, but like teaching that to people and showing that they can have that stem control without having tools is huge.
That's my first lesson with most pet dog people.
Yeah,
'Cause if
you
I
can tell your dog
fix
no.
if I can fix
Yeah.
the one thing
Yeah.
that bothers them the most, then I can usually get them to buy in to do the 6 or 8 weeks of other stuff.
Yeah. You say
But
no.
I would,
no doesn't mean stop what you're doing. No means prepare to feel pain.
Yeah, right.
Or drive into target behavior, depending on how you
Sure.
prep it, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I will preface this though, like, for my personal dogs, I prep force fetch heavily with tug. Like, I do a lot of abbreviated bite work stuff with them. Like, they're getting back tied. We're putting back pressure on them. We're teaching them to regrip. We're doing all this kind of stuff. Like, your out's already clean. Like, those things are already there. The dog already wants to do them in drive. Like, I've already got that. And I really think that that lays a foundation that when I go to force fetch and now I go through unforced force fetch through the NEPA pose system, like now I just have that clean cue of, hey, turn that game on, and you will see me go through that, and then I'll go back to doing it with a tug. So we'll get through it, pressure on, the whole thing, but then the game starts, and that reward event after, I think, is huge. I think that pays dividends.